Imagine a threat so great, heaven had to create enforcers just to keep it caged. Not demons, not mortals, but something older, too dangerous to ever be unleashed again. They don't sound trumpets, they don't deliver prophecies, and they don't ask questions. The powers exist for one reason: to keep the worst threats to existence exactly where they belong, bound, contained, and unable to rise again. You won't see them in paintings. They don't show up in your favorite psalms. But if they ever stopped doing their job, you'd know it instantly. Because the veil would tear, the abyss would break open, and everything heaven tried to build would collapse in on itself. They are enforcers, sentinels, the spiritual equivalent of the final lock on the deepest vault. When Lucifer rose in rebellion, they were among the first to resist. When chaos stirs, they're the ones still watching, still holding the line, long after the flames have died down and the world has moved on. So who are they? Where did they come from? And what exactly do they guard that's so dangerous we're not even meant to see it? This isn't a story of hope or healing. It's a story of prevention, of discipline, of angels you never hear about, because that's how you know they're doing their job. This is the story of the powers, the angels that defend against the forces of chaos. The powers didn't emerge in a blaze of glory or ride in on pillars of flame. They weren't shaped to sing or to shine. They were created with one purpose in mind: defense. In the earliest moments of divine order, when heaven was still forming its hierarchy and creation was just beginning to stir, the powers were established to keep the chaos out. Their name comes from the Latin potestates, meaning authorities or forces, not just strength, but sanctioned strength, power that is permitted, directed, and trusted. Unlike the higher choirs that dwell closest to God's throne, the powers were positioned in the second sphere, that strange in-between space, where divine will begins to take structure before it ever touches earth. They stand alongside the dominions and the virtues, but their role is more defensive, more reactive. More on this later. Pseudo-Dionysius, the 6th century mystic who laid much of the groundwork for angelology, described the powers as protectors of cosmic law. They weren't just soldiers, they were barriers. Their presence made it possible for divine order to exist without constant intrusion from the forces that lurked beyond it. Some traditions say they were created after the first seeds of disobedience were sown, not as a reaction to Lucifer's fall, but as a measure anticipating it. As if God, in designing the perfect system, accounted for the possibility of rupture and made sure something would be there to stop it before it spread. Other sources, especially from early Christian mysticism, describe the powers as angelic sentinels who regulate the balance of spiritual power itself. Their creation was heaven's way of saying, there will be no unchecked forces here, not even among the divine. They are part of the system, not above it. They take orders from the dominions and pass them downward with military precision. They don't improvise. They don't stray. In a hierarchy designed to reflect divine order, the powers were heaven's original insurance policy. They are the rules made manifest. And in a universe constantly on the brink of entropy, that might be the most necessary force of all. If you were expecting radiant wings, shining halos, or robes glowing with heavenly light, you're thinking of another choir. The powers don't arrive with pageantry. They aren't meant to inspire. They're meant to withstand. The powers are often described as militant in posture, armored in form. Not decorative armor, not ceremonial, functional, thick, heavy, unadorned, like it's been worn for 1,000 years without rest. Their appearance is about presence, not beauty. They're not symbols of divine elegance. They're the ones who stand still when everything else breaks. Some ancient texts describe them as towering and faceless, with featureless visors or helms that conceal any trace of identity. Others depict them with 6 wings folded like a cloak, or wielding staffs and spears made of light, tools of restraint, not violence. Their wings don't shimmer. They stretch like banners, wide and resolute, never moving unless needed. They're rarely shown in flight. The powers are not travelers. They are stationed, posted, positioned like statues until something tries to cross a line that shouldn't be crossed. In many mystical accounts, their bodies glow dimly, like smoldering embers beneath heavy armor. The light is there, but it's buried deep, controlled. Power under pressure. The kind that doesn't burst forth. It holds back, keeps steady, and never overreaches. Some interpret their eyes as being layered with glyphs or runes, symbols that represent the spiritual laws they protect. Others describe them as glowing blank slates, eyes that see not individuals, but threats to order. They don't read hearts. They scan for breaches. In art, when they are depicted at all, they're often shown at gates, at thresholds, or flanking divine structures, silent watchers standing guard while other angels sing or kneel. In one apocryphal vision, a power was described as holding a chain of infinite links, each one glowing with a name known only to heaven. Each link contained a spirit they have bound and will never be released. Unlike archangels whose presence shakes the earth or thrones whose symmetry overwhelms the mind, the powers don't draw attention. Their presence is the absence of danger. Their beauty lies in their stillness. You don't feel awe when they appear. You feel the ground stop shaking. They aren't the spark, but rather, they're the chain around it. In the angelic chain of command, the powers are part of the second sphere, positioned between the higher choirs that serve directly before God, like the thrones, and the lower choirs that interact more directly with the material world, like archangels and angels. They often receive their directives from the dominions, who manage the flow of divine authority. The dominions delegate, the virtues energize, but it is the powers who enforce. And once the command reaches them, there is no further debate. They act as the final stop, the force that ensures heaven's will is not just spoken or envisioned, but secured. The powers don't speak. They don't command attention. They don't make themselves known unless something's gone terribly wrong. Their personality is law-bound, quiet, firm, and resolute. If thrones represent truth and virtues represent movement, the powers represent discipline. They don't operate from emotion, but from order. There's no hesitation in their judgment, no delay in their response. They don't waver. They don't second guess. They act with the full weight of heaven's command behind every decision, never cruel, but never soft. Unlike more expressive or interactive angels, the powers don't show compassion, not because they lack empathy, but because compassion isn't part of their job. They don't offer comfort. They don't negotiate. They restrain. They contain. They enforce. If an angelic presence feels cold, distant, and immovable, like a wall that won't yield, it's likely the work of a power. But their detachment doesn't come from arrogance or apathy. It comes from necessity. These are heaven's sentinels. Their mission is too vital to allow for distraction. Their role is unique among the choirs. They serve as guardians of the divine plan. They don't write the laws or interpret them. They make sure they're carried out. When something crosses a spiritual line, when a demonic force attempts to rise, or when chaos begins to bleed through the cracks, they move to stop it. Not to fight for glory, not to punish, but to restore balance before the damage spreads. They are the line between what is allowed and what must be sealed away. They're often called the border guards of heaven, and with good reason. If seraphim burn with worship near the throne, and archangels descend to guide humanity, the powers stand on the threshold, where divine structure meets everything that seeks to break it. That includes fallen angels, demons, and corrupted spirits. The powers don't just fight evil, they restrict it. They limit its reach. They seal doors no one else is allowed to open. And this brings us to their powers. First and foremost, the powers have authority over spiritual boundaries. They're able to sense when demonic or chaotic forces are moving in places they shouldn't. They act as a sort of celestial firewall, detecting, isolating and neutralizing supernatural threats before they can spread. If a spiritual invasion tries to cross into sacred territory, it's the powers who respond, not with noise, but with force. They are also capable of binding, not just physically, but metaphysically. This is one of their most dangerous abilities, the power to lock entities, fallen angels, rebellious spirits, or cosmic threats into states of confinement. In apocalyptic theology, they are sometimes described as the jailers of the abyss, keeping imprisoned spirits restrained until the final judgment. This isn't just legend, it's an active duty, still ongoing, as long as the abyss remains sealed. In addition to containment, the powers enforce divine justice. They don't pass judgment themselves, but once heaven's verdict is clear, they're the ones who deliver consequences. Whether that means stripping a spiritual being of its influence, limiting its movement, or ejecting it from a place it no longer has permission to be, the powers do what others will not, without vengeance, without hesitation. They are also spiritual tacticians. In traditional angelology, it is believed that they coordinate the response to demonic incursions, working alongside the archangels and dominions. But while archangels may rally and dominions may organize, the powers secure the battlefield. They anchor the perimeter. They make sure no line is crossed more than once. Two particular tasks further define their legacy. First, they are sometimes called the guardians of resurrection. In certain early Christian texts, the powers are entrusted with protecting the souls of the righteous, preserving them until the appointed day when resurrection will come. Not as comforters, but as wardens. Their job is to ensure that nothing impure reaches what is meant to rise in glory. Second, they are associated with the Tower of Babel. According to some traditions, when humanity rose together in pride, building a tower to the heavens, it wasn't wrath that ended the rebellion, but confusion. And that confusion, that divine scattering of unity, was enforced by the powers. They broke the pattern before it could become a threat, not with destruction, but with separation. That's how they operate, not always through battle, sometimes through disruption, sometimes through silence, but always with authority. In behavior, the powers are utterly disciplined. They are emotionless not because they lack feeling, but because obedience is more important than sentiment. They don't chase recognition. They don't ask for praise. They are absolute in purpose. When they act, it's because someone or something crossed a line that should have remained untouched, and within heaven's structure they answer to that line. They're not the ones you pray to. They're not the ones who visit you in dreams. But if they ever stopped doing their job, you'd know instantly, because the veil would tear and everything holding the spiritual realm in place would collapse. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. The book of Revelation is overflowing with chaos, beasts rising from the sea, angels blowing trumpets, stars falling from the sky, and bowls of divine wrath being poured out in terrifying sequence. But for all its thunder and flame, there's a strange kind of structure to the mayhem. Every judgment follows a pattern. Every act of destruction has a ceiling. And nothing ever crosses that invisible line between divine order and outright cosmic collapse. That's where the powers come in. They aren't named directly in Revelation. Most angels aren't. But their presence is unmistakable to those who know where to look. These are the angels who stand behind the scenes, ensuring that heaven's plan doesn't spiral into chaos. They don't blow the trumpets. They're not the messengers delivering scrolls or casting seals. They are the containment force, the ones making sure that each seal breaks exactly when it should, that no plague spreads farther than allowed, that the judgments of God fall with precision and not excess. Think of Revelation as a divine blueprint unfolding one step at a time. Without the powers, it would be a storm with no center, just wrath unleashed without end. But that's not what we get. Instead, we see cycles, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, interludes of calm between waves of catastrophe, judgments released in order, not in panic. That balance, the line between divine judgment and total annihilation, is the kind of restraint only the powers are said to provide. Many early Christian mystics believed that the powers are the ones who hold the abyss shut during this apocalyptic hour. Not with chains, but with spiritual authority. When the bottomless pit is opened and smoke pours out like the breath of a furnace, it's the powers who stand at the edge, ensuring nothing escapes prematurely and nothing returns unchallenged. They are the wardens of divine timing, the ones who make sure evil is never stronger than the moment allows. Some scholars even suggest that the angel who binds Satan for 1,000 years in Revelation 20 could be a power. We're told he descends with a great chain, seizes the dragon, and locks him in the abyss. He's not named, he doesn't give a speech, he just acts, with perfect authority, as if his only purpose is to secure what others fear to confront. That kind of clarity is exactly what defines the powers. What makes their presence in Revelation so vital isn't what they do publicly, but what they prevent silently. Every time the world looks like it's about to shatter, something holds it together long enough for the next act to begin. That pause, that restraint, that unseen structure, it's not just good storytelling, it's divine security. And in the lore, that's exactly the realm of the powers. Without them, the end times wouldn't unfold. It would detonate. The seals would rip all at once. The bowls would spill over. The enemy would rise without resistance. But none of that happens, because even at the end of days, someone still holds the line. And that someone isn't loud, he isn't named, he isn't crowned. He just doesn't let go. Long before the prophecies of Revelation and the rise and fall of kings, there was another conflict, a rebellion that shook heaven itself. Lucifer, once radiant among the highest, refused to serve. With pride swelling in his heart and ambition burning through his voice, he rose against the order he was meant to protect. And in that instant, everything the powers stood for was threatened. They weren't the first to speak. They didn't question or hesitate. They acted. The fall of Lucifer isn't described in exhaustive detail in the Bible, but tradition, particularly rooted in early Christian and apocryphal texts, paints a dramatic scene. A third of the heavenly host swept up in defiance, the structure of heaven quaking, the boundaries between light and darkness tested to their limits. And through that chaos, the powers held firm. Unlike Michael, who is often cast as the warrior and banner-bearer in this cosmic war, the powers were the front line of resistance. Not because they chose to be, but because it was their role. They were the ones positioned at the boundary between heaven and what threatened it. They weren't there to strategize. They were there to contain. In some interpretations, the powers were the ones who first moved to restrain the fallen, cutting off routes of access, sealing gates, isolating corruption before it could spread like rot through the ranks. It wasn't about winning a battle. It was about protecting the architecture of heaven from internal collapse. And when Lucifer was cast down, many traditions say it was the powers who followed, not to punish, but to ensure that the abyss became a prison, not a passage. They were the ones who carried the chains, who sealed the doors, who took the weight of divine judgment and turned it into permanence. According to some writings, their work continues long after the fall. The powers are said to be the jailers of demonic forces, spiritual containment officers who hold back the dark until the appointed time. They don't destroy evil. They restrain it. They don't argue with rebellion. They suppress it. This role isn't glamorous. It's not triumphant in the way popular tales like to imagine. It's tedious, relentless, heavy. Because the powers don't just fight once, they guard forever. The war may have been won, but the rebellion never sleeps, and so neither do they. And it's in that ongoing duty of resistance, restraint, and resolve that their legacy was forged. They weren't made for battle, but they didn't run from it. They stood their ground when heaven trembled, and when the devil fell, they made sure he stayed down. The powers were never meant to be close. They don't whisper in dreams, they don't nudge hearts toward repentance, and they don't appear in visions offering comfort or guidance. If the angels of the third sphere interact with humanity personally, the powers remain deliberately distant, silent, watchful, immovable. And yet, their influence is always there, not in what they say or do directly, but in what they prevent. They aren't sent to intervene in daily struggle. They don't heal or inspire. But when demonic influence is pushed back, when spiritual corruption is contained before it spreads, that's when their presence is most deeply felt, quietly and without fanfare. Some early traditions even associate the powers with the internal struggle of the soul, not as comforters, but as reinforcements. When temptation presses in, when the line between right and ruin becomes thin, the powers aren't there to pull you to safety. They're there to make sure the forces trying to break you don't go any further than they're allowed. They don't fix the soul, they guard its perimeter. There are also teachings that place them near the point of death, not as reapers, but as boundary keepers between the material world and what lies beyond. Not every soul is ready to pass, and not every spirit approaching is meant to come. The powers have been imagined as those who hold the veil steady until the moment is right, ensuring that what belongs to heaven or hell doesn't cross early, or at all. And perhaps their most human-facing role, though rarely spoken of, is found in justice. Not earthly justice measured in laws and courtrooms, but divine justice, the kind that balances consequence and mercy. The powers don't decide who is guilty or who is forgiven, but they enforce the verdict when it comes, not out of anger, out of necessity. They don't make the world safe. That's never been their purpose, but they keep it from collapsing. And sometimes, especially in a world that seems to be spinning faster toward destruction, knowing that something, someone, is still holding the line, might be the most powerful comfort of all. Of all the angelic orders, the powers might be the most overlooked, not because they're unimportant, but because they're not designed to be noticed. They don't speak in scripture. They don't intervene in personal stories. They don't carry messages, deliver visions, or command the spotlight. And in a tradition that often favors narrative, their absence from the stage can make them feel almost invisible. But that silence is intentional. The powers are not performers. They're not messengers or miracle workers. They are sentinels, placed not where they'll be seen, but where they'll be effective. And if they do their job well, nothing happens. No warning, no disaster, just stillness. That's the paradox of the powers. Their greatest acts leave no story behind. Unlike the seraphim, who burn with unceasing worship, or the archangels, who carry divine messages to prophets and kings, the powers operate in silence. Even early theological texts give them little detail. Pseudo-Dionysius names them in his celestial hierarchy, noting their strength and authority, but offers no grand tales or vivid encounters. Later thinkers called them heaven's militia, its border guard, its enforcers of divine law. But even these titles come with minimal elaboration. They're not forgotten. They're just too busy holding back what shouldn't be to care whether or not we're paying attention. And to be honest, that's exactly how it should be.